as we head through into Christmas Day. For the time being, though, it's cold outside. Holes in the cloud will allow temperatures to plummet. A fairly widespread frost anywhere from Scotland, England and some parts of Wales. Away from Northern Ireland and the West Country, a keen breeze here, more cloud and temperatures holding up. But certainly it's going to be a frosty start to the day come Wednesday morning across many areas, but with some hazy sunshine, so some brighter skies. Through the morning, though, that cloud will eventually bring some rain to Northern Ireland, quite a fresh wind across Irish Sea coast, as the rain slowly pushes up towards the western parts of Scotland, clipping West Wales as well as the West Country. Drier skies to end the day further east, but temperatures will struggle here, 4, 5, 6 degrees Celsius. And through the evening, as the rain pushes across Scotland, it will turn to snow above around 300-400 metres and even some sleetiness at lower levels for a time. As some showers move in across England and Wales, and then more wet weather returns to Northern Ireland through the latter part of Wednesday night and into Thursday morning. However, the key feature of the weather as we head through Thursday, yes, there'll be quite windy in places, outbreaks of rain, but the temperatures will be a few degrees higher, certainly feeling milder across England and Wales and Northern Ireland. Still a lot of rain, though, just grinding to a halt across Scotland, and a keen breeze across the far north as more rain pushes in across Wales and the West Country later, and also that brisk wind. Temperatures here, double figures though, so not so bad, although the air will slowly get colder from the north as we head into Christmas, with a chance of some snow showers in the northeast.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
I'm Neil Oliver. You can join me live every Saturday evening for opinions and discussions about the week's top stories. There's also a smattering of history and archaeology and features that define our great British Isles. You'll hear my thoughts unfiltered, as well as those of my guests, and we don't always agree. And we want to hear from you too. Neil Oliver Live, Saturdays from 7 on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
And welcome to the afternoon agenda on GB News with me, Alex Phillips. Now, this show is all about your opinion and mine. So it's not news as you know it, but discussion and debate on things that are, or really should be, on your agenda. So with that in mind, here's what we're covering today. Is an invasion of the Ukraine by Russia more of a question of when rather than if? Last week, they demanded strict limits on the activities of the US-led NATO military alliance in countries in Eastern Europe. We'll get the latest from a research fellow who previously worked at the European Commission and NATO. We'll also cross live to Chelmsford Crown Court and speak to our Home Affairs and Security Editor Mark White after 5 members of an organised criminal gang have been sentenced for attempting to smuggle people into the UK. And it may not be on the agenda of traditional news outlets, but we need to talk about the science. Yep. Do you trust the SAGE modelling? That's the agenda for the next hour, but what's on yours? Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or you can tweet me at gbnews. But first, it's time for the news headlines with Polly.
Good afternoon, your GB News at 4 o'clock. Scotland's First Minister has announced all outdoor events for 3 weeks from Boxing Day will be limited to just 500 people to help slow the spread of the Omicron variant. Nicola Sturgeon confirmed that also means the cancellation of Edinburgh's Hogmanay Street Party and football matches will become effectively spectator-free. All these measures are in place for the next 3 weeks. The restrictions do not apply to private events such as weddings. She's also stressed that advice for Christmas Day still stands, but advised family gatherings should be limited to 3 households if possible.
Time when these services are already under severe pressure and also dealing with high staff absences, limiting large-scale events will help them focus on delivering essential services to the public. So I would ask the public, despite the disappointment I know this decision will generate, to please understand the reasons for it.
Meanwhile, £1 billion is being made available by the Treasury to support businesses most impacted by Omicron across the UK. Industry leaders have been calling on the government for further support as the hospitality sector suffered increasing cancellations over the festive period. Labour has welcomed the measures but say they should have been introduced earlier. The funds include £6,000 grants for hospitality and leisure firms in England. The government will also cover statutory sick pay for those who test positive or who have to self-isolate. And £30 million will be added to the Culture Recovery Fund to help museums and theatres in England.
Look at the grants that we're providing today, up to £6,000 for hospitality businesses. They are comparable in generosity to the grants that were provided when these businesses were fully closed, completely closed earlier this year. It's worth £1 billion, so it's a very significant amount of support. So I think taken together, the steps we've announced today will help hundreds of thousands of hospitality businesses and the millions of people that they employ.
Rishi Sunak. The man accused of terrorism and of fatally stabbing the Conservative MP Sir David Amess has pleaded not guilty in court. Sir David was killed during a constituency surgery in Essex in October. Our reporter Alice Porter was in court and gave this update.
On the 15th of October of this year, Sir David Amess, the late MP for Southend West, was fatally stabbed at his constituency clinic. At the scene, arrested was at 25-year-old Ali Harbour Ali. He was charged with the murder of Sir David Amess, and today he appeared at the Old Bailey accused of his murder, but also accused of preparing for acts of terrorism between May of last year and September of this year. The court heard that this included a reconnaissance of different locations, including the Houses of Parliament, and looking at different MPs' addresses. Today he has pleaded not guilty to both charges. Mr Justice Sweeney, who is the judge presiding over the case, he appeared via a video link and he is set the 21st of March of next year for the trial to start.
4 men have been jailed for attempting to smuggle dozens of illegal immigrants into the UK by boat. The trafficking gang was sentenced to a total of 36 years between them at Chelmsford Crown Court. A 5th gang member will be sentenced at a later date. A single trip stood to make them more than £1 million, and trips were planned to happen at least weekly, the court heard. 69 migrants, including 2 pregnant women, were found on board a converted fishing boat intercepted in the North Sea in November last year. Rail operators are running reduced timetables in the run-up to Christmas because of COVID-related staff shortages. Dozens of train journeys have had to be cancelled by Coast Country every day this week. Avanti West Coast has also removed peak ticket restrictions over Christmas to help spread demand. There's a reduced service across Southern Thameslink and Great Northern Network until the end of the day on Christmas Eve. Greater Anglia have also cancelled a number of their trains. Northern Rail and ScotRail are all running amended timetables, and TransPennine Express is warning of short notice cancellations over the coming fortnight. The The chairman of the Police Federation of England and Wales has been suspended amid an investigation into alleged sex crimes. John Apter has also been suspended from duty by Hampshire Constabulary. The allegations relate to claims of 4 breaches of professional standards between October and this month. A criminal investigation is also being carried out into claims of sexual touching on 2 of those occasions. Dubai's ruler has been ordered to pay £554 million to settle a custody battle with his ex-wife over their 2 children. Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum will have to pay the largest sum to ever be granted by a UK court in such a case. The High Court judge ruled the bulk of the payout is for the children's education and lifetime security, and to address the grave risk posed to them by their father. £251 million will be paid to his ex-wife for the upkeep of her British mansions and for her future security. Here in London, Big Ben will chime on New Year's Eve with all the faces of the famous clock tower on display for the first time in 4 years. The Elizabeth Tower and the bell mechanism at the Houses of Parliament have undergone the biggest restoration project in their 160-year history. The bell will be struck 12 times to mark the start of 2022. Works to Big Ben and its tower are due to be completed completely in the spring. You're up to date. I'm back in half an hour now. Back to the afternoon agenda. Here's Alex.
For many philosophers, truth only exists in mathematics. Numbers alone are the highest form of reality. How often do we express ourselves in the form of calculations? The glass is half full. 2 + 2 does not equal 5. You don't feel 100% of the time. Maths has a huge impact on our lives, even if we barely pause to realise it. There are formulae for your car insurance, models to determine interest rates and mortgage repayments, sums to work out your Christmas bonus, algebra to design the bridge you cross, and arithmetic to estimate the time it takes you to get to work. Equations are interwoven into everything. Yet, it's fair to say that never before has mathematics and modelling been used to dictate quite so much of our lives as it is today. Next slide, please. Because a lot of the rules that have locked us up indoors, gobbled up our basic freedoms, separated us from loved ones, cancelled operations and rolled out mass vaccinations have been underpinned by modelling, or the science, as we are repeatedly reassured by the government. And who could argue with that? Maths never lies, does it? Next slide, please. Yet anybody with even the faintest grasp of the so-called science knows that there's really no such thing. There is no one orthodoxy, no singular set of proven principles that can act as a sole determinant for a course of action in what are wholly unprecedented times. Because what you get out of an equation depends entirely on what you put into it. And here lies the chicken and egg conundrum at the heart of the current controversy about whether or not we should be locked in our homes again this side of Christmas or the other. An extraordinary exchange took place on Twitter over the weekend between the editor of The Spectator and the chairman of the SAGE Modelling Committee, the maths boffins churning out the stats and projections that guide government policy. Professor Graham Medley, when asked whether they were modelling only for worst-case scenarios, sort of let it slip that we generally model what we are asked to model. There is a dialogue in which policy teams discuss with the modellers what they need to inform their policy. The distinction revealed by this casual comment is quite major. A Copernican revolution in thought, if you will. Because if that's the case, that rather than government guidance being based on the modelling is commissioned to back up the guidance, then we're in a situation where if the government wants 6, the statisticians must give them 2 times 3. In short, the required outputs are deciding the inputs. Show me the scenario where the NHS is overwhelmed and provide the evidence of how this would happen. Next slide, please. Plato once said, "I have hardly ever known a mathematician who is capable of reasoning." And perhaps this is something we should all bear in mind. Because while mathematics is a wonderful thing, its broad application struggles to calculate emotion, free will, nuance, or treat humans as complex individuals rather than units of blunt measurement. And history has taught us that when regimes implement such crude calculations as productivity, risk, and man management, society is far worse for it. Here's looking at you, communism. Even big elections over the past decade have exposed flaws in modelling. You just have to look at how polling has been consistent in being consistently off. And just as pollsters often disagree on their verdicts, using different weightings, questions and sample sizes to garner diverse results, so too do the data scientists currently number crunching to inform the government. So, like it or not, isn't it time we mere mortals tried to lift the lid on quite how these modellers are drawing their conclusions, given the extreme impact they're having on the very fabric of our existence? Oh yes, it's time for your GB News advanced maths lesson, because today we really need to talk about the science. Well, let's kick off this maths lesson by speaking to Timandra Harkness, a writer and fellow at the Royal Statistical Society. So, Timandra, is it all just a numbers game? Can you kind of explain to the general public, really, how modelling works?
Well, I think the point about modelling is you use modelling when you don't have all the information about what's actually happening now, either because you want to look into the future or just because you don't really have all the information you need. So you make certain assumptions and you go, well, we have an idea how the maths of an epidemic generally works, so let's put some assumptions into that and see what results we get out. It's, in a way, it's not mysterious at all. You just have certain, as you were saying in introduction, you have certain equations, certain models of how previous epidemics have worked, and the very basic things are quite well understood. And then you put in various assumptions and you turn them into mathematical form, and you run the machine and you get some answers, some scenarios out. So it's probably rocket science, but rocket science in itself is basically just maths. I think the difficult thing is partly that most of us get quite intimidated by numbers. And even the mathematicians, I mean, I'm really barely a statistician, but even quite advanced mathematicians will say it's much harder to think in numbers than it is to think in words. And most of us just kind of switch off and go, oh, well, I don't understand that, and so I'm going to take it on trust. And that is a mistake, I think, because any of us, you don't have to be a mathematician to just say, well, what were the assumptions there? What were you assuming about what humans would do? Or what were you assuming about how infectious this is? Or what were you assuming about what the health service can cope with? And then you can find out what are the basics in the model. And also just to say, well, what did you leave out? What were you not measuring? I mean, for example, as you said, it's very difficult to mathematically model the impact on society of separating people from each other for months and months and months. I mean, you can say, oh, mental health, and it does have an individual impact, but the kind of the impact on the fabric of society of people not relating to each other in person is really hard to measure and really hard to include in any model.
When it comes to this modelling, there's been criticism lately, especially around Omicron, that perhaps SAGE are modelling for the worst case scenario and that the modelling is too pessimistic, and so it's therefore going to generate a suggestion of government policy that is on the stricter end of the spectrum. Is that something you would agree with?
I think there is a long-standing problem of using data and evidence in policy. And, politicians like to talk about evidence-based policy, but if you talk to some of the people who are asked to bring the evidence, they'll often say, yeah, well, this was policy-based evidence because the politicians had already decided what they wanted to do. And then they would come and try and commission research that would back up what they wanted to do. And I should say, I think most scientists and statisticians and modelers who have a sense of professionalism and responsibility will say, well, I don't want to do that. But if somebody says we're going to fund you to look into this thing, and then they'll only use the results if the results come out the way that is useful to them, there's not really a whole lot you can do. I think with the worst case scenario thing, it's quite interesting. The Graham Medley and some of the other SPI-M, the modelling people, had a kind of right to reply to The Spectator and gave their point of view. And they said, well, look, we are asked to model a whole range of possible scenarios. We're asked to model with different assumptions, like either, Omicron's going to be mild and not spread that much, or Omicron will spread really fast and also be really bad. And so we'll model a range of things and we'll give them all to the politicians, and it's the politicians who make the decisions. But I think one of the problems is that we, the public, don't generally get to see the full range of scenarios. Usually the modelling people are they're quite strict about what they'll say. You often hear them say, this is not a prediction, this is a scenario. And what they mean is, we're not saying this will happen. We're saying that if our assumptions are correct, then the model says this will happen. But we're not saying that it will happen. And for them, that's quite a natural thing to say, this is a scenario, this is a projection, as in we've projected it into the future, and this is a prediction, which is a thing a human makes using human judgment. But if you're a politician and you want the public to do what you say, it's much quicker to just go, OK, well, get me the worst looking scenario and we put it on a slide, and then people will go, well, that looks really terrible, I don't want that to happen. And quite often the statisticians themselves will come out afterwards and say, you used that very badly, you weren't at all transparent about where that came from, and it was already out of date. But I think the problem lies really with the politicians who, instead of including us in the discussion, just wanted, the statistician David Spiegelhalter, who I'm a huge fan of, he coined this phrase, number theatre, where instead of using numbers to understand something better, you just use a scary graph so that everyone goes, oh, no, that looks bad, I'll do whatever you tell me. And there's been far too much of that, and far too much hiding behind the science, as you said. So politicians don't want to be accountable for the decisions that they themselves are making. I think that's where the problem is.
Timandra, thank you so much. Fascinating stuff. Passing the buck to the science, it seems. It's been fascinating having you on. Writer and Fellow of the Royal Statistical Society. Now, I'm also joined by James Woudhuysen, a visiting professor at London's South Bank University. Does modelling always look at worst-case scenarios, or is this something that in a crisis, we could forgive the government, given that Professor Lockdown, that Neil Ferguson himself, said that if the government had locked down a week earlier, the start of the pandemic, there would have been half the deaths. So surely we can forgive them for basically toying with worst-case scenarios.
Well, I wouldn't forgive them, and I wouldn't forgive the forecasters either. At no point in my memory of this crisis has anybody used a simple phrase which statisticians usually use about forecasts, which is the degree of confidence, the confidence level they attach to particular forecasts. And if you're at 95 or 97% confident, then you're pretty confident. But they never discuss that because, as Timandra Harkness said, the assumptions are opaque. There is a sort of spurious, this must be the truth aspect to the whole modelling business, which is because we deal in numbers, they're neutral, equations, they're neutral, we're just strictly a priesthood for technocracy, and what we say is the truth. And it's just not the case. The equations that you select, the assumptions that you make, the questions that you ask, very importantly, the questions that government asks of forecasters, to a large degree determine the outcome. The algebra, Alex, is much more important than the arithmetic. It's what you start off with that's so important. And that's a black box to the general public. It's probably a black box to Boris Johnson, for all he knows about forecasting. So then what you come to is the outcome, which generally sells a lot of newspapers. And what's going to sell a lot of newspapers? Is it going to be, the news today is roughly the same as it was yesterday. We've got nothing alarming to report. In fact, it's one whole bore. You might as well turn on to the leisure section. No, they're going to want big headlines and so on. The government wants to have that narrative of fear because it makes sure that the populace is pliant and does what it says. And that's really the stage that we've come to.
If Sage had been your students and you've been marking their number theatre, their slideshows after every press conference. What sort of grade would you give them? Do you think we can trust the stats and the science, as the government keeps alluding to, or do you think that we should all be very wary?
Well, they don't discuss the counter tendencies to their forecasts. They don't discuss nearly enough the what-ifs and so on. And the question we've got to ask, Alex, is why are they so consistently pessimistic and so consistently wrong? Neil Ferguson, but all the rest of them. And the answer is that they have set off from broadly the politics of the 80s, really. If you remember, in 1987, Margaret Thatcher, of all people, sent a leaflet to 23 million households in this country saying, don't die of AIDS. 23 million leaflets she sent out. So, you know, the alarmism about the future and the sense of uncertainty is something that we hear invoked so much. You can always be certain that people will be talking up the uncertainty. And what we often fail to do is recognise that it's through experiment, through science, through the development of vaccines, and most recently through the development of antiviral drugs to treat people who are hospitalised, that we can turn the uncertainty that surrounds into a disease into calculated risk. We can work out what really is going on. Instead, all we do today is play up the uncertainty, and because the politicians don't know what to believe in anymore, they do defer to forecasters, and the result is, broadly, that they want the sort of paralysis scenario put forward, because then they cannot be blamed for anything that goes wrong, and the real deaths that happen through cancer, and the disturbance through mental health, and the disruption of our schools is not factored in. That's the other thing about all the forecasting. You're not factoring in even a vulgar cost-benefit analysis, let alone the overall damage to economy, society, education, and all the rest of it. That's not, it's just a purely medical, mathematical, you know, discussion that they want us into. And generally speaking, their own loss of direction dictates a sense of uncertainty and therefore of fear.
This has been replicated around the world, though. I mean, the approach of lockdowns and Professor Neil Ferguson's initial modelling have been used widely, broadly adopted by the WHO even. Do you think that's been a global mistake?
Well, you know, with all of these institutions, you've got to ask a little bit, not in a conspiratorial manner, but, you know, what's their track record? What's their funding? What's their outlook? How corrupt are they? Especially when you're looking at United Nations institutions like the World Health Organization. Now, if you look at their record in relation to previous viruses, especially avian flu and these sorts of things, their record is not consistent. It's marred in a whole lot of politics. It's exactly the same with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in the domain of climate, where also fears run rife all the time. So these are not neutral, purely scientific, disinterested, you know, miraculously funded, well-meaning people 24 hours a day. It's not how it works, not how science works. As you yourself pointed out, it's a contested terrain. It's one in which people take positions. And therefore, this sort of kind of robe of neutrality and of respectability and of authority that we can never question them.
The science.
The science, right? It's not science, it's scientism. And the old scientism in the Cold War would tell you how many Vietnamese villages to bomb next with a spreadsheet, a primitive spreadsheet. The new scientism says, do what we say, because we are right. That's it. No more democracy. It's extremely dangerous for democracy, extremely dangerous for the future of politics in this country. The modelers have a lot to answer for.
Wow. Tough note to end on. James, thank you so much for coming into the studio. It's been an absolute pleasure. James Woudhuysen there, who's visiting professor at London South Bank University. Now, after the break, we'll get the latest as 5 members of an organised criminal gang have been sentenced for attempting to smuggle people into the UK. Back in just a moment. You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Welcome back. 5 members of a criminal gang have been sentenced for an attempt to smuggle 69 migrants into the UK inside a fishing trawler. Well, let's cross live to our Home and Security editor, Mark White, who joins us live now outside Chelmsford Crown Court. Mark, what's the story? What's the latest?
Well, this is a major people smuggling ring that the National Crime Agency has smashed, and it signifies actually a worrying development as far as the people smugglers are concerned. We have, of course, been fixated of late with the small inflatable boats coming across the English Channel on an almost daily basis. But the people smugglers have always been looking for new ways of getting people illegally into the UK, and this one route that they're looking at now increasingly is the use of more seaworthy vessels like fishing vessels to try to get more migrants on and to land them further up the UK. This particular vessel at the centre of this court case, the Svanic, was due to dock at Great Yarmouth with 69 Albanians on board. It had been purchased for some 20,000 euros from Latvia and was on a voyage from Ostend in Belgium to Great Yarmouth when it was intercepted by Border Force and the Coast Guard along with the National Crime Agency. They had become suspicious about this vessel, drawn to it by the Swedish authorities, who were called to an incident where it ran aground a couple of weeks before the voyage to carry these 69 Albanians. Well, today the gang of 5, 4 of them appeared back in court. A 5th member couldn't make it because of an outbreak of COVID in the prison where he is, but the 4 gang members were jailed for almost 36 years between them, jails terms ranging from 7 to 10 years. I've been taking a closer look at this people smuggling operation. Tracked by a Coast Guard helicopter, this is the converted fishing trawler Svanic being buffeted by waves as it crossed the North Sea in November last year. But this boat's fishing days are long gone. Instead, packed into her hold are 69 Albanians being smuggled into the UK. The trawler never made it to its intended destination of Great Yarmouth. Intercepted by Border Force and the National Crime Agency, it was brought here to the port of Harwich. Some of the 69 migrants visible on the deck of the Svanic and on the dockside. The day before, she'd set off from Ostend in Belgium. These images, captured by one of the migrants on deck, shows just how rough the sea was during the 14-hour voyage. Authorities say those on board were in real danger. Most were below deck, but had the vessel encountered difficulties, there was only one lifeboat, which hadn't been serviced in years and was only capable of carrying 20 people. When they searched the boat, National Crime Agency officers found this laptop in the wheelhouse. It linked other organised criminal gang members to the people smuggling operation.
Police, can you open the door?
It's clear Lithuanian national Artūras Jucius wasn't expecting this early morning door knock at his South London home.
From the National Crime Agency, okay? I'm here this morning to arrest you, all right, for the offence of conspiring to facilitate illegal entry into the UK.
A search of his phone found various audio messages as Artūras Jucius set up this operation, promising to smuggle 50 migrants a week into the UK once they got enough money to buy and convert the boat.
We're going to bring you every week 50 people. Just we need to invest now 40,000 if you want, 20 you, 20 me. From first trip, we're going to get that money back.
Juris and 4 other Eastern Europeans, all members of this organised crime group, have now been convicted and jailed for an operation the National Crime Agency said would have been highly lucrative for the gang. They charged their illegal passengers £15,000 each for the trip on this 60-year-old vessel. An inspection of the Svanic found she'd undergone a crude conversion to allow people to be carried in her hold. But conditions were filthy and cramped, and the fact there were only 20 life jackets on board showed how little regard the people smugglers had for the safety of their human cargo. Many thousands of people have arrived illegally into the UK this year on small boats across the English Channel. But while focus has understandably been on this growing crisis, organised criminal gangs have continued to expand their operations, looking for other routes into the UK. The commandeering of fishing boats like the Svanic to land migrants further up the coast and in rougher weather is now becoming increasingly common. Mark White, GB News. Well, in passing sentence, the trial judge said that he was in no doubt that there were many more such trips planned, that this trip on the 17th of November last year was a trial run to land these 69 migrants, and then each week the criminal gangs would continue to take across at least 50 migrants a time in the Svanic. Now, most of them, we're told, were willing participants who had paid that £15 a head charge to come across to the UK, but the court heard that there were some on board who would not have had the money to pay, and instead they would have entered into an agreement to pay the money back when they got to this side of the North Sea and to the UK. In other words, they would become modern slaves, entering that modern slavery cycle, which is extremely difficult to get out of. Well, the gang's leader Arturas Jusas, who you saw there in that report, was jailed for 9 years and 9 months. It would have been longer, but he pled guilty before the start of this trial, so automatically got a quarter of his sentence reduced at that point, or he would have been, as I say, given a much heftier sentence. The fifth member of this gang, who couldn't attend today because of that COVID outbreak, will be back here at a later date, where he will also face a significant jail term.
Mark, well done for bringing us that story. Thank you so much. Mark White, our Home and Security editor there. You're watching the Afternoon Agenda, and we have lots more still to come. But first, let's take a check on the news headlines with Polly.
Hello there. Your latest headlines. Scotland's First Minister has announced all outdoor events for 3 weeks from Boxing Day will be limited to just 500 people to help slow the spread of Omicron. Nicola Sturgeon confirmed that also means the cancellation of Edinburgh's Hogmanay Street Party and football matches will become effectively spectator-free. All these measures are in place for the next 3 weeks. The restrictions don't apply to private events such as weddings. Nicola Sturgeon's also stressed that advice for Christmas Day still stands, but advised that family gatherings should be kept as small and as safe as possible. The Chancellor has pledged £1 billion to support businesses most impacted by Omicron across the UK. It includes a one-off £6,000 grant for hospitality and leisure firms in England. The government will also cover statutory sick pay for those who test positive or who have to self-isolate for small and medium-sized employers in the UK. Labour have welcomed the measure but say it should have come sooner. The man accused of terrorism and of fatally stabbing the Conservative MP Sir David Amess has pleaded not guilty. Ali Harbi Ali is charged with the murder of Sir David during a constituency surgery in Essex in October. The 25-year-old is also charged with preparing acts of terrorism between May 2019 and September this year. A full trial is expected to be held in March. Metropolitan Police have released CCTV pictures of missing student Harvey Parker. The 20-year-old was last seen outside the Heaven nightclub in London in the early hours of Friday. Police are appealing to anyone who may have seen him to come forward. Big Ben will finally chime on New Year's Eve with all the famous faces of the clock tower on display for the first time in 4 years. The Elizabeth Tower and the bell mechanism at the Houses of Parliament have all undergone the biggest restoration project in their 160-year history. The bell will be struck 12 times to mark the start of 2022. Works to Big Ben and its tower are due to be completed in the spring. Those are your headlines. I'm back at the top of the hour. See you then.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello there. Here are your headlines for the next 24 hours into Wednesday. A brighter start for some after a frosty night before more cloud and rain arrives from the west. Now, as we head through into Wednesday, high pressure wanes towards the near continent. Low pressure waiting in the wings across the mid-Atlantic, driving cloud and also outbreaks of rain through the latter part of Christmas week into Christmas Eve. So through Tuesday evening, we will see some holes in the cloud develop across some parts of England and Wales, as well as Scotland. So a fairly widespread frost, a colder night than recently. That's away from Northern Ireland and the West Country, where we'll see a brisk breeze and always more in the way of cloud. And that leads into a cold start to the day on Wednesday morning. But we will see some sunshine, hazy sunshine at that, as cloud continues to thicken. And you can see this rain just moving up across Northern Ireland, clipping the western side of Scotland through the morning into the afternoon. Some showers trailing behind, so we could see one or two of these across Wales as well as the West Country. Elsewhere it's dry, it's fine, but it will be cold outside, temperatures struggling. But we hang on to some brighter weather across eastern fringes through the latter part of Wednesday. Through Wednesday evening and overnight, that rain continues its passage northwards. Snow over the Scottish mountains with some showers moving in across England and Wales. And then slowly but surely the air turns milder. Yes, there will be a lot of cloud around and also more rain waiting towards the west with some stronger winds. So all in all, things start to turn a bit more unsettled. And then as we head into the Christmas period, Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, it does turn milder for many before a battle between the colder air towards the north and the milder air towards the south. Highest chance of seeing snow, the northeast of Scotland on Christmas Day. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, no jab, no job. It's the government's policy for frontline NHS staff. But despite Health Secretary Sajid Javid giving health workers a deadline of April next year to get vaccinated, over 200,000 still haven't had the jab. A recent survey found 61% of them would rather lose their job than get vaccinated. Well, let's speak to NHS GP Dr. Currie. How serious staff shortages could this cause if people refuse to get jabbed and then can't do their job?
Yeah, it's a worry, isn't it? I think in some ways we've got a bit of a grace period because we know that we have until April, and we suspect that this wave is going to be hopefully contained within the next month or two. But certainly something that we do urge all staff to get vaccinated. We know that it's the safest way out of this pandemic, and it will protect them, their lives, their families, and of course their patients and our patients. And that's the most important.
You say the word we, but when there's 200,000 medical professionals who are not taking the jab, why is that? These are people who surely see day in, day out the risks of COVID and understand the value of vaccinations.
Yeah, it's a strange one. I mean, I think there is still a very strong body of misinformation. And, you know, some of the great work we've been doing over the last few months with our discussions is about the importance of the vaccination, the effectiveness, how it protects people. But of course, social media is so powerful. And the NHS staff are just normal human beings like all of us and are susceptible to hearing these rumours and having the worries and concerns, of course. What we have to remember, though, is when you are a healthcare professional, there are vaccinations that we have to take to enter the field. You know, for example, before you are able to work in a hospital environment, you need to have all of your hepatitis B vaccinations done. So we do know that that's not something you would have chosen to do necessarily or had the option to do. This is something you have to do if you want to enter the healthcare profession. Now, what we know is COVID-19 is on the rise. We see this Omicron virus and we see that it's flying around. So many people are catching it. Just over the weekend, I ended up being one of the only doctors working because so many were unwell from the virus. So we know it's really spreading. So it's really important to protect ourselves and each other and get this vaccination. So if you are listening to this as a healthcare professional thinking, should I, shouldn't I? The most important thing is to get vaccination for yourself as much as for the NHS.
It does stagger me that there is this lack of uptake with 200,000 people in the frontline NHS services there. I mean, surely this is cause for concern. Are they as hesitant when it comes to other vaccines? Or are there widespread concerns that perhaps there's been something amiss about the vaccine rollout when it comes to COVID?
What I would say is we have been fantastic in terms of the vaccine rollout. I think the NHS staff who are working in vaccination centres today, we've been working throughout the week, the weekends, volunteers. It's a phenomenal effort. So those people who are doing that, chapeau, we're so proud of you. But I think the staff who are not vaccinated, again, they have legitimate concerns and we understand that. And there are a lot of concerns from the public. But actually, when you look at it, the science is very clear. The virus is spreading. The vaccination helps significantly. If you've had two booster doses, you've had your two vaccination doses and your booster, you have got such a level of protection, which means that should you get this virus and this Omicron virus, which is so transmittable at the moment, your chance of becoming very unwell, of becoming sick, of family members becoming sick is so low because you're so well protected. And I think when you look at the odds, and if you are an NHS staff worker who's been seeing the front line, what you do know is you just don't know who's going to get sick and who's not. You may be someone in your 20s or 30s and feel like, actually, I'll be okay. But we've seen it as frontline workers. We've seen people in their 20s and 30s. Some have been well, some have had a slight cold, some have become very sick and ended up in intensive care, and some have passed away. So this vaccine, this virus doesn't discriminate, doesn't tell you who's going to get sick and who's not. And that means that the safest thing you can do is get vaccinated.
Do you think the government should be mandating compulsory vaccinations for frontline workers? Because it strikes me that if we've learnt one thing in recent times is that having the vaccine alone does not prevent the transmissibility of the virus. So the argument as to needing to have the vaccine working on the front line to prevent spread, instead of, let's say, regular testing for infection, is somehow weakened by that. So should the government be going so far as to say doctors and nurses must get the vaccine?
There's always this challenge, and we were discussing this just the other week in terms of autonomy and choice. But when we look at it, when we entered the medical field, age 17, 18, you wanted to go to medical school, you wanted to become a nurse, you wanted to enter in some capacity, you had to have some vaccinations as a mandatory to work with patients because of your safety and because of the safety of patients. And currently we're in the middle of a pandemic. So I can completely understand why we would mandate this, because actually to safeguard the safety of patients, to safeguard the safety of our NHS staff, and to ensure their families are looked after, a vaccination program is essential. The thing to remember as well is that if we're not vaccinated, yes, we may get COVID and survive, but we could get very unwell. We could mount a very poor response because we don't have the antibodies, and suddenly we're sick, we're unwell. Now, if it's one or two of us, hey, that's not the end of the world. But if it's a lot of frontline NHS workers and you deplete the system, you end up working the existing ones really hard or overburdening the system because we know there are so many people who are sick, and suddenly the NHS will break, and at that point we're in real trouble. Now, being someone who works on the front line in hospital, but also in the community, and seeing how people are waiting for their referrals, waiting for their surgeries, and the lists are getting longer and longer, that's not what we want. We want to get out of this pandemic the quickest way we can, get our lists off, get people being seen, and get back to functioning normally. And the best and the quickest way is for all of us to get vaccinated.
I mean, you say that, but what is the situation like at the moment? Because, as you said, there's a huge NHS backlog, and it seems to be all shoulders are to the mill right now in getting jabs in arms for the booster rollout, which has been exponentially expedited to, in theory, be finished by the end of this month. Surely doctors like you have very little time to deal with anything else but the pandemic.
Yeah, we have been absolutely inundated. I mean, it is so busy. We are still seeing emergency, acute unwell patients who we can deal with. But frustratingly, we've not been able to catch up again in the last few weeks with the chronic things, because we know that we are in the middle of a pandemic. And when you're in the middle of a pandemic and you have a new variant and this virus is significant, it's deadly, it's something that can really impact us, we need to be cognizant of that, and we need to put all hands to the deck to sort that out. It's very frustrating, you know, even from a personal level. I might have a physiotherapy appointment that's coming up that's been cancelled because our physiotherapist has to go to the front line. But guess what? I think that's the right thing. I'm happy they're doing that, because if we can support the NHS right now, if we can redeploy all of our staff to getting everyone vaccinated, what we'll do is we'll find less people sick, less staff sick, less people affected and not having businesses, less of the NHS overburdened. We'll be able to come out of this. We will be hopefully preventing businesses from going under, businesses from not being able to trade, from the economy having to go into lockdown. You know, these are all things that we don't want to go into. And it sometimes feels that I don't want to get vaccinated. I don't mind. I won't do it, but everyone else can. But if we all come together, join hands and say, look, I'm going to get vaccinated. I'm going to support myself and my family. We're actually supporting our mental health, our economy, and getting out of this pandemic.
Dr. Mokaki, thank you so much for joining us once again here on the Afternoon Agenda. Well, we all hope the NHS does come out the other side and we can go and see the doctor again, don't we? That would be nice. You're watching the Afternoon Agenda on GB News with me, Alex Phillips. Now, after the break, we'll be hearing your thoughts on whether we should trust the SAGE modelling when it comes to coronavirus. Has it all been a little bit too pessimistic? Don't go anywhere. But first, here's the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Some brighter skies for some tomorrow before more cloud and rain arrives from the west. However, backtrack to this evening and high pressure still firmly in charge, as it has been for the last week or so. And what that means, calm conditions and a cold night. But it is waning towards the near continent, allowing milder air to come from the west and also bands of rain. And we'll see that as we head through into Christmas Day. For the time being, though, it's cold outside. Holes in the cloud will allow temperatures to plummet. A fairly widespread frost anywhere from Scotland, England and some parts of Wales. Away from Northern Ireland and the West Country, a keen breeze here, more cloud and temperatures holding up. But certainly it's going to be a frosty start to the day come Wednesday morning across many areas, but with some hazy sunshine, so some brighter skies. Through the morning, though, that cloud will eventually bring some rain to Northern Ireland, quite a fresh wind across Irish Sea coast, as the rain slowly pushes up towards the western parts of Scotland, clipping West Wales as well as the West Country. Drier skies to end the day further east, but temperatures will struggle here, 4, 5, 6 degrees Celsius. And through the evening, as the rain pushes across Scotland, it will turn to snow above around 300-400 metres and even some sleetiness at lower levels for a time. As some showers move in across England and Wales, and then more wet weather returns to Northern Ireland through the latter part of Wednesday night and into Thursday morning. However, the key feature of the weather as we head through Thursday, yes, there'll be quite windy in places, outbreaks of rain, but the temperatures will be a few degrees higher, certainly feeling milder across England and Wales and Northern Ireland. Still a lot of rain, though, just grinding to a halt across Scotland, and a keen breeze across the far north as more rain pushes in across Wales and the West Country later, and also that brisk wind. Temperatures here, double figures though, so not so bad, although the air will slowly get colder from the north as we head into Christmas, with a chance of some snow showers in the northeast.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. Well, it's no surprise that businesses in the hospitality sector are suffering from a raft of pre-Christmas cancellations and no-shows yet again, amid a rise in COVID-19 infections and fears over the Omicron variant. One venue told GB News it has lost 1,000 bookings in just a week and a half. Our East of England reporter Amelia Harper has the story.
The week before Christmas, a time when hospitality would make a quarter of its annual profits. Now businesses are yet again preparing for another quiet festive period due to COVID-19. UK hospitality warns as many as 10,000 sites could close if financial support isn't announced imminently. And the Prime Minister is still yet to decide whether to bring in more COVID restrictions. St Albans High Street, home to many pubs, bars and restaurants. Hospitality has been hit once again by the introduction of the new Omicron COVID variant. The sector normally relies on this time of year, but many places have seen a rise in cancellations and a lack of footfall through their venues. 50 metres in this direction is the White Swan, serving only drink. And 50 metres in this direction is the Peahen, serving both food and drink. So what's the situation for these two venues, just metres apart, off the same high street? Doors are open at the White Swan. It's a wet pub only and doesn't take bookings. Despite government messaging urging caution, it is still trading, but it's half of what it was before the pandemic.
Last night it was down 50%. I've been fortunate by staying in a wet situation pub, but for those that are going to try and recover and depend on the restaurant trade and the food trade, you know, I don't know how that's going to work for them. I can see closures here. You know, I've done my best to spend as much as I could to keep it afloat. I'm hoping my regulars will keep coming and it just carries on as a local.
On the other side of the high street, the Peahen is serving food. Normally tied up with bookings this close to Christmas, most have been cancelled.
It's really demoralising, actually. Going into Christmas, we were so excited. The team were buzzed. We were looking in for an amazing Christmas, and it started off so strong. And then we've just finished the last week now, and it's came in at about 33% below where we expected to be, which is quite a knock. Bookings-wise, in people, in total guests, we've lost over 1,000 people in just over a week and a half.
For now, all these businesses can do is prepare their venue for those that do come in. Boris Johnson says further restrictions to tackle the spread of Omicron are possible. And if that happens, hospitality will want more support to make sure they can keep their lights on. Amelia Harper, GB News, Hertfordshire.
Well, the Prime Minister has given an update on whether any extra COVID measures will be introduced before Christmas. Here to talk us through it all is our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. Darren, what's the latest?
Well, hopefully we're just going to hear from the Prime Minister, aren't we?
Well, let's hope we are. You can hear from
Good afternoon, everybody. I wanted to update you quickly on the latest COVID situation. There's no doubt that Omicron continues to surge with a speed unlike anything we've seen before. situation remains extremely difficult. But I also recognise that people have been waiting to hear whether their Christmas plans, your Christmas plans, are going to be affected. So what I can say tonight is that naturally we can't rule out any further measures after Christmas, and we're going to keep a constant eye on the data. We'll do whatever it takes to protect public health. But in view of the continuing uncertainty about several things, severity of Omicron, uncertainty about the hospitalisation rate or the impact of the vaccine rollout and the boosters, we don't think today that there is enough evidence to justify any tougher measures before Christmas. And we continue to monitor Omicron very closely, and if the situation deteriorates, we will be ready to take action if needed. And what this means is that people can go ahead with their Christmas plans, but the situation remains finely balanced. And I would urge everyone to exercise caution, to keep protecting yourselves and your loved ones, especially the vulnerable, and remember to keep following the guidance. Wear a mask indoors when required to do so, keep fresh air circulating, and take a test before you visit elderly or vulnerable relatives. So, if you have not done so already, then please drop everything, find a walk-in or go online and make an appointment and get boosted now. Thank you very much and happy Christmas.
Well, Darren, it sounds like it's good news for now, but if we're to believe various newspaper reports, there's a bit of a split in Cabinet over whether restrictions should be imposed or not.
Yeah, let's be clear, following that Cabinet meeting, it was almost certain that we weren't going to see restrictions in England ahead of Christmas. We know, for example, Nicola Sturgeon had ruled them out even as early as last week, that Christmas would go ahead as normal. Simply, in the end, the Conservative Party would not have accepted any restrictions on Christmas. The Prime Minister has continually said, hasn't he, that this Christmas will be a lot better than last. Now, last Christmas was pretty awful, so that's a pretty low bar. But politically, this was very tricky for him. And you're right in saying that many within the Cabinet expressed their concerns about restrictions at this stage, given the data isn't necessarily as clear as they would like it to be. But this is very significant news for 50-odd million people, nearly 60 million people that live in England, knowing for certain that they will be able legally to meet up with relatives on Christmas Day with no restrictions in place. Now, some may want to exercise caution. That's clearly up to them, but there will be no rules governing our Christmas in England this year. Big news announcement, and provides an element of certainty that many, even within the Conservative Party, have been calling for in recent days. In terms of the overall picture, though, of course, the Prime Minister said before Christmas. And this does not mean that we will not see potentially significant restrictions to our lives in England after Christmas. Parliament would almost certainly have to be recalled. And I think there is a sense, he says it's finely balanced, there is a sense that the data coming in is really difficult to judge. I mean, we look at case numbers today, for example, at 90,000 cases, very high numbers. We know this is very transmissible, but that doesn't seem to be the doubling every 2 days that we thought we were going to see last week. Now, in part, that may be because there's been an awful lot of behavioural change, particularly in London, essentially people locking themselves in to a large degree to ensure that their Christmases are not ruined. I mean, I was in central London last night, bars and restaurants, pretty quiet, just a couple of days ahead of Christmas. So that might explain some of those figures. But then you look at some of the hospital data in London, and it's not so good. Hospitalisations in terms of bed occupancy are up 41% in the last week, 41% in a week. And the number of people on ventilators is only up 4%. So again, that might say that, well, hospitals might see an awful lot of admissions, but actually they might not be as severe as we've seen in the past. It's really complex. I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not judging these figures and statistics. But at the moment, clearly Boris Johnson feels that there's not enough grounds to impose more restrictions. That is not to say that with every day and more data comes in, it is entirely possible that we will follow other parts of the UK, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, by imposing restrictions after Christmas. But this does provide certainty, as I say, for 50-odd million people that this Christmas will, and this we've held the Prime Minister to this, will be an awful lot better than last Christmas. The one thing I would say is, for many in the scientific community, and indeed for the government's critics, this isn't necessarily good news. They fear that we will be reacting too late, that when we get the data, that kind of putting in restrictions will not be enough. as in because of the lag. And their fear is that, yes, it's great that people will be able to enjoy Christmas, but that will come, they would argue, at a cost.
So it's almost like delay and perhaps have to pay more later with something, perhaps a circuit breaker lockdown?
Well, I mean, that was Sir Patrick Vallance, you know, who's the chief scientific officer of this country, always said that it is better to impose lighter restrictions earlier rather than having to impose much harsher restrictions later. As I say, that's where some scientists, probably the majority of scientists, epidemiologists, think that we should be acting now. We know it was in that SAGE report last week. In terms of the restrictions, we don't know, but it has been mooted that we could move back to step 2 or phase 2, which was kind of last April, wasn't it, with restrictions in terms of the number of people who can mix indoors, and also kind of closing down or having restrictions on kind of large-scale events. So not back to a kind of full-scale lockdown, but back to pretty severe restrictions. We don't know that yet. Government hasn't made a decision on this. Also, Parliament will have to be consulted. Tory MPs are pretty rebellious. And we'll have to see what the data looks like. But, as I say, we've got certainty at least until Saturday that in England at the moment in time we're not going to see any further restrictions.
And in terms of continentally, there are a lot of people, of course, planning holidays who might have gone abroad. We know that France has closed its borders to the UK. Do we think that situation is going to be replicated elsewhere?
Well, it is. I mean, Germany's done quite the same. I think the concern for travel is less that actually restrictions will now remain in place for the UK, people leaving and coming from the UK. I mean, they may well do, and the countries have already announced it. For most places, they haven't imposed restrictions because the Omicron variant is now so prevalent in most European countries that letting a couple of Brits in is not going to make a massive world of difference. I think the concern for travellers is not being able to get to places now. It'll be more when you turn up, what type of restrictions will be in place. I mean, Denmark has essentially imposed pretty harsh restrictions. The Netherlands has gone down effectively into a proper old-school lockdown for the next couple of weeks. France at the moment insisting it's not going to do that. But again, these things change very quickly. And I always think for people going and travel, in the most cases, the uncertainty of not knowing what's going to be in place, the rules and restrictions when you get there. I mean, no one wants to really go and just have to spend a holiday in their bedroom. Or in addition, what might change when you are there. So I think it's more the uncertainty rather than anything else. But what it does mean, of course, is those people who are travelling inside the UK to visit relatives, whether that be in the north of England or in the southwest or in London here, or going to Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, you know, you will be able to do this year. You have to remember, of course, for people in London last year, they were not able to do that. They were told effectively to stay at home, not to leave the capital. That's not going to be the case this year. And that will come clearly as a relief to millions and millions of people.
Darren, thank you ever so much. Great work. Well, there you are, folks. You can baste your turkey, put the Bucks Fizz on ice and put the pigs in blankets. Christmas is on. You're watching The Afternoon Agenda, and there's lots more still to come. Hello and welcome. If you've just joined The Afternoon Agenda, I'm Alex Phillips. This show isn't news as you know it. We discuss and we debate things that really should be on your agenda. So, still to come this hour. A group of MPs say transgender people should no longer have to live in their acquired gender for 2 years before getting legal recognition. But some women's rights campaigners argue this move could jeopardise single-sex spaces. I'll be speaking to one of those campaigners. And it may not be on the agenda of traditional news outlets, but we really need to talk about the science. Do you trust SAGE modelling? That's the agenda for the next hour. What's on yours? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me @gbnews. Guided by the science. That's what we've been told. As if science is an omnipotent divine intervention, inalienable, immutable and absolute. The science. Well, except there's no such thing as the science, only science. And all too often, it does not agree. One nerd's indisputable hypothesis is another boffin's bunkum and balderdash. So when the government talks of a singular science, it's only right, surely, we question what and whose. For most of us, the modelling informing Chris Whitty's jolly through his televised slideshow is mind-boggling, to say the least. But with rumours of rifts at Cabinet over whether the number crunching is way too pessimistic, and a slip of the Twitter tongue by the head of modelling at Sage, suggesting perhaps that their maths must match policy rather than the other way around, surely it's time we tried to wrap our skulls around the formulae dictating our lives. Oh yes, folks, it's GBNews maths lessons, because we really need to talk about the science. Next slide, please. Well, friend of the show and numerical boffin, Jamie Jenkins, who's an independent statistician and political commentator, joins me now. Jamie, should we trust the modelling? Should we trust the science and be taking decisions from that? Or should we be far keener to look into what's going into those calculations and perhaps be a little bit wary of basing too many decisions on it?
Yeah, Alex, I think that obviously you need to have some plan for some scenario. It's the same with the weather. You know, you've got weather models that the Met Office will run to kind of look at what's happening at the moment, what's happened recently, to kind of tell us what's going to be happening on Christmas Day. Are we going to get any snow for Christmas Day? And it's a similar thing, really, with when you're trying to predict pandemics, because you've kind of got what data is happening at the moment, what have we learned from the past, what can we predict in the future. But I think the difficulty we've had with the SAGE modelling and Professor Neil Ferguson themselves is that many times the models that they've been coming up with and the numbers they've been coming up with, when you then, because the good thing with scenarios, you get to mark the homework in a way. And think back to September, we were told by SAGE if England didn't bring in Plan B restrictions, we would get potentially up to 7,000 hospitalisations a day in England. Obviously, Boris didn't bring in Plan B restrictions. Now, the 7,000 was the upper limit, but they said 2 to 7,000. So that was the range that they came up with. What actually happened? It was closer to 700, 1/10 of the worst case scenario. So Boris didn't follow the SAGE advice then, and we didn't end up with a catastrophic outcome than what SAGE was saying. So we've had this constantly in the past now where Neil Ferguson originally was predicting 500,000 deaths. He's been predicting 5,000 Omicron deaths have been talked about. And I think it was on the Breakfast Show a couple of days ago talking about the kind of how nonsense those facts and figures were as well. So it's difficult to, it's like the boy who cried wolf. There could be a time where SAGE comes up with the bang on kind of metric of what we want. But when they're so wrong all of the time, can you trust it?
I suppose you can't blame a government for being risk-averse, though, because the same Neil Ferguson said that he believes now, latterly, retrospectively, if the government had locked down a week earlier, at the very start of this pandemic, so back when the borders were shutting and continental Europe was largely locking down, that he thinks that there would have been half the deaths that we finally saw. I mean, that's a big change based upon a delay of just 7 days. Do you think with Boris Johnson announcing just then at 5 o'clock that Christmas isn't cancelled, we can all go ahead with our plans as normal, that this is a political decision that could end up having terrible consequences? Are you quite comfortable that rather than constantly go towards the worst case scenario, that the government are finally learning to balance this out with societal needs and economic needs?
Well, on the front of the Daily Mail last 27th of December, we were told 15 million jabs to freedom. Now we're currently, Alex, on 128 million jabs now. So, 8.5 times as many vaccinations have been dished out. Now, what Boris and the other First Ministers across the UK are banking on is the booster rollout to kind of get extra antibodies in the population. Not a bad thing, I suppose, there. And they've sped up the actual booster rollout. But if you look now at this time last year, and people who are going into hospital, 70% of all the hospital admissions with COVID were 65 and over in terms of age. And we know this is a virus that attacks the elderly. Now, let's look at the actual statistics today. 87% of people who are 65 and over in England have had a booster jab. And it's even up to in the high 90s when you look at 75 to 79-year-olds. So the most vulnerable people have already had a booster. Now, if the government's banking everything on the booster, and the evidence coming out of South Africa and Denmark is this is a much less kind of deadly virus, then there is no real evidence to kind of go into a lockdown, because where are all these hospitalizations going to come from that SAGE are talking about if the majority of people who may be the ones who end up in hospital have already had the booster, you're not going to see 18, 19, 20-year-olds rocking up in an ICU without having a booster, only with 2 jabs, probably not even vaccinated, because that's the way the virus works. So I think Boris has probably made the right decision at this point. What we see after Christmas, there's obviously a split in cabinet, and we'll see what he comes up with in the next few days, I suppose.
Do you think Sage have been transparent enough with publishing not only their findings, and we often have Chris Whitty standing there in front of the big screen saying, next slide, please, and showing us a whole load of impenetrable graphs and spreadsheets. And we go along and we nod and we say, yes, he's a boffin. He knows more than we do. He's showing us bits and bobs and graphicating worst case scenarios. So obviously we trust this. But what we're not seeing are the discussions going on between the policy unit and the modellers to determine quite what they're modelling and how. How significant is that? And do you think the Sage has been transparent enough?
Well, they've released the minutes, I think, of the meetings, and they are more transparent than they are in Wales, in terms of what goes on with the modellers. I've never really looked at Scotland. I think the difficulty you have, I think in part is driven by kind of a lot of the media channels. GBNews actually hasn't been driving a lot of this, but a few weeks ago the BBC were all over South Africa and this Omicron variant. Cases in South Africa have come down in the last 3 days, and we haven't seen this rocket jump up in kind of deaths that may have occurred in previous waves. You put the BBC News on, I watched it last night, not a mention of South Africa. Similar when we had the India variant many, many months ago, we didn't see it. And the public, my mum was phoning me last week because I was taking my dad to Newbury races, saying, should you take him because of the Omicron variant? So, well, I'm looking at the stats. I think there's a relatively low risk to go into Newbury races. The vast majority of the public are scared because of a lot of what the media report. And the media have a part to play in this, Alex, because they will normally pick up the Sage worst case scenarios. And in fairness to Sage, they do put a range in. But what gets reported by a lot of the newspapers is the worst case scenario, in particular The Guardian, who are pretty bad at doing this. And then people read that. And the problem then is, because a lot of people don't understand kind of ranges and statistical uncertainties, they see the worst case scenario and they think that's the actual scenario that's going to happen. So I think, in part, Sage could look at the probability of some of these things they're doing, but the media themselves are a part to play as well.
Jamie, wise words there, and thank you for coming on. The most sensible, common sense, open and honest TV news channel of them all. We love having you on. Jamie Jenkins, independent statistician and political commentator, blowing some smoke up the proverbial backside of this wonderful TV station. I'm now joined by David Payton, a professor of industrial economics at the University of Nottingham. David, do you think decisions are made based on the health or the economy? And do you think Sage are going about things the right way by mapping out worst case scenarios and the impact on the NHS?
Well, right from the start, one of my worries about how policy has been enacted is that there seems to be an almost exclusive focus on infections and potential benefits of lockdowns and restrictions without really considering the costs. And it was interesting, the admission earlier on this week from the chair of Sage that they have no recommendation from the government to model the costs of the restrictions. And it's a huge gap because it's not either or, it's looking at both. And of course, we care about health and well-being, but lockdowns and restrictions also affect health and well-being as well as the economy. So you do need a balance there. And that's one of the problems, I think, with the modelling that government bases its decisions on. They don't consider the costs and the effect on the economy. But I think the other side of it is also we don't see a real analysis of whether the restrictions they propose actually have the benefits they think. Government seems to think, and indeed their scientific advisors seem to suggest, well, when you impose restrictions, a 10 p.m. curfew, or you have a rule of 6, that automatically reduces infections. When you look at the real evidence and not the modelling, the real data around the world, many of these restrictions seem to have very little impact, sometimes no impact at all on restrictions. So we have both problems. We don't have a sufficient evidence base on the costs of these restrictions, and we have an overestimate of how effective they're likely to be. And the tragedy for me is that we don't seem to have lessons being learned. So still, SAGE, the latest models, don't put any real-world data into affecting how much restrictions will lead to reductions in infections. They just assume that the restrictions will reduce infections and reduce deaths without looking at the real-world data.
Well, why on earth are they not using real-world data? If this was the world of finance, if these were bankers who were modelling potential outcomes for a business takeover and got it wrong or weren't using real-world data and weren't going back to correct their findings and feed in new inputs into their systems and models, they'd be fired. They wouldn't be doing their job properly. And when it comes to locking people down, I can't wrap my head around why any government out there wouldn't want the most accurate modelling to be done. Why do you think SAGE are not doing this?
Well, it is a little bit baffling. So one of my bugbears is that they don't model the effect of voluntary restrictions. And we've seen time and time again, as infection rates go up, people respond automatically. They limit their activities. And we're seeing this at the moment. The government have put out lots of advice and, to some extent, scary statistics about what's going on. But people have responded, and we've seen it, it does cost pubs, that we've had cancellations and so on. But the SAGE models don't take that into account. They're very explicit. They say we don't model behavioural change that will happen automatically. And that's not just a sort of, a flaw. It's a really fundamental flaw. Now, it is baffling to me why that hasn't been changed over time. You could perhaps understand it right at the start. But as your previous guest has said, some of the predictions we can judge against the outcomes. So the fact that they were predicting perhaps between 2,000 and 6,000 hospital admissions earlier in the autumn, and we didn't come close to even 1,000 admissions, should at least make them think twice and think, well, should we be looking at things a different way? But in the end, of course, it's ministers who take decisions. And it was interesting seeing the reports from Cabinet yesterday that at long last, I think somewhat too late, there were some tougher questions being asked within Cabinet about the modelling they were being presented with. And I think one of the reasons that's happening is that we can actually see the real data. So we've had these really scary stories about what's going to happen with Omicron, and even the best case scenarios from that the government have been presented with is suggesting, well, we'll have 3,000 hospital admissions every day if we don't have big new restrictions. Well, at the moment we're on about 800 admissions a day, and that number is lower than back in early November. They've actually been decreasing. Now, of course, you can't be 100% certain what will happen, but government haven't even been presented with a scenario where, admissions don't rise to 3 times what they are, or more than 3 times what they are at the moment. That's said to be the best case scenario. Yet we've already seen in South Africa, infections are decreasing quite rapidly now, much quicker than what it was expected. Now, South Africa is a different country to us. It has different demographics and so on. But even in this country, in London, which is most affected, the rate of increase of cases has started to come down over the past few days. So it's really becoming quite clear we're not going to be in the situation that the modelers were expecting. Yes, I think hospital admissions will go up a little bit more because cases are going up now in the older age groups. But of course, they're not the ones who are going to be helped if you shut down nightclubs. That's not going to sort of help infections amongst the over 80s, given that infection rates amongst the younger groups, the rate of increase now seems to be coming down. And hopefully by the time we get to after Christmas, when they're talking about imposing new restrictions, it may even be that those case rates will have peaked already by that point.
Professor David Payton, thank you so much for coming and shining a light on the murky world of data and modelling. Professor of Industrial Economics at the University of Nottingham. Putting a little bit of salt, let's say, on the SAGE science. Now, after the break, a group of MPs say that transgender people should no longer have to live in their acquired gender for 2 years before getting legal recognition. But some women's rights campaigners argue that this move could jeopardise single-sex spaces. Yep, we'll be discussing that next. But first, here's the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Some brighter skies for some tomorrow before more cloud and rain arrives from the west. However, backtrack to this evening and high pressure still firmly in charge as it has been for the last week or so. And what that means, calm conditions and a cold night. But it is waning towards the near continent, allowing milder air to come from the west and also bands of rain. And we'll see that as we head through into Christmas Day. For the time being, though, it's cold outside. Holes in the cloud will allow temperatures to plummet. A fairly widespread frost anywhere from Scotland, England and some parts of Wales. Away from Northern Ireland and the West Country, a keen breeze here, more clouds and temperatures holding up. But certainly it's going to be a frosty start to the day come Wednesday morning across many areas, but with some hazy sunshine, so some brighter skies. Through the morning, though, that cloud will eventually bring some rain to Northern Ireland, quite a fresh wind across Irish Sea coast, as the rain slowly pushes up towards the western parts of Scotland, clipping West Wales as well as the West Country. Drier skies to end the day further east, but temperatures will struggle here, 4, 5, 6 degrees Celsius. And through the evening, as the rain pushes across Scotland, it will turn to snow above around 300-400 metres and even some sleetiness at lower levels for a time. As some showers move in across England and Wales, and then more wet weather returns to Northern Ireland through the latter part of Wednesday night and into Thursday morning. However, the key feature of the weather as we head through Thursday, yes, there'll be quite windy in places, outbreaks of rain, but the temperatures will be a few degrees higher, certainly feeling milder across England and Wales and Northern Ireland. Still a lot of rain, though, just grinding to a halt across Scotland, and a keen breeze across the far north as more rain pushes in across Wales and the West Country later, and also that brisk wind. Temperatures here, double figures though, so not so bad, although the air will slowly get colder from the north as we head into Christmas, with a chance of some snow showers in the northeast.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Welcome back. You're watching the Afternoon Agenda on GB News, and there's lots more still to come. But first, let's get a check on the news headlines with Polly.
Alex, thank you. Your GB News headlines. Boris Johnson has confirmed there won't be any additional coronavirus restrictions implemented in England before Christmas Day. However, the Prime Minister warned the situation was finely balanced and that could change after the Christmas period.
What I can say tonight is that naturally we can't rule out any further measures after Christmas, and we're going to keep a constant eye on the data. We'll do whatever it takes to protect public health. But in view of the continuing uncertainty about several things, severity of Omicron, uncertainty about the hospitalisation rate or the impact of the vaccine rollout and the boosters, we don't think today that there is enough evidence to justify any tougher measures before Christmas.
Well, that's England. What about Scotland? The First Minister there, Nicola Sturgeon, has announced all outdoor events for 3 weeks from Boxing Day will be limited to just 500 people to help slow the spread of the Omicron variant. Nicola Sturgeon also confirmed that means the cancellation of Edinburgh's Hogmanay Street Party and football matches will become effectively spectator-free. All these measures are in place for the next 3 weeks. The restrictions don't apply to private weddings, and she's also stressed advice for Christmas Day remains, but advised family gatherings should be kept small and safe where possible. Meanwhile, the Chancellor has pledged £1 billion to support businesses most impacted by Omicron across the UK. It includes a one-off £6,000 grant for hospitality and leisure firms in England. The government will also cover statutory sick pay for those who test positive or who have to self-isolate for small and medium-sized employers in the UK. Labour have welcomed the measures but say they should have been introduced earlier. Those are your headlines. Now back to Alex.
Well, today we've been talking about the science, and I've had a range of guests discussing whether or not we can trust modelling. And I'm asking, do you trust the SAGE data? Well, let's now look at how the government used the forecasting. I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Edwina Currie, a former Conservative MP and Junior Health Minister. How do governments use modelling to make decisions, Edwina?
The modelling is not done by anybody in government. It's done by some unbelievably clever academics. And any sensible government has several different models in several different universities, which is what we've got. The one that tends to get all the headlines tends to be from Imperial College, because that's always the most pessimistic. Heaven knows why we've suddenly become a terribly pessimistic nation, but we have. And then they have to make judgments based on the best case, the worst case, what are the options likely to be? And bear this in mind as well, that the moment something is published, people change their behaviour. So people look at the figures, and older people, millions of older people, for example, will say, I'm not going to take that risk. And they tend to withdraw from society. It's a shame very often, but they do. And that in itself then affects the rest of the figures. And it means that people sometimes don't trust the figures. But it doesn't mean they're wrong when they're published. It just means that the next batch are going to be different.
I mean, do you think that governments by nature have a duty to be somewhat risk averse? You've been through this yourself as a Junior Health Minister with the salmonella crisis, when you spoke about, a lot of eggs having salmonella. There was a huge impact on the sale of eggs in the UK. So you've been through that. Do you think that it's government's duty to forecast the worst possible scenario and to protect its public, or should they chill out a bit and not be gloomsters, as Boris would say?
Well, here's the Currie rule of thumb. You will notice I've got my Christmas nail varnish on. The Currie rule of thumb is governments are right to be ultra cautious and risk averse when the figures are getting worse. And governments are right to be much more gung-ho and less cautious when the figures are getting better. The problem with Omicron is it's a real head scratcher. The numbers of cases are rising very fast indeed. And yet the level of hospitalisation is only going up a little bit. And a lot of those are still from Delta. And the number of deaths seems to be fairly flat. So it's a real puzzle for ministers. I think they've taken the right decision today. And I think they're right to say, let's see how we get on in about 10 days' time, when perhaps we've all had a chance to mix it and rub shoulders with people. And let's see if that gets better or that gets worse. My hope is that it's going to get better.
I mean, hindsight is, of course, a wonderful thing, and Neil Ferguson himself has advised a very cautionary note during the course of this last year that the government perhaps dilly-dallied a little too much at the start of the pandemic. Do you think that governmental decisions are still smarting somewhat from that? And would you forecast, therefore, that, yes, we might have been given Christmas Day in this latest announcement, but given the lag time that happens with rising infection rates and potential hospitalisation, with hospital rates and occupancy in London, for instance, going up by 40% in a week, that we may have a bit of a miserable post-Christmas?
Oh, wow, that's a lot of different ifs and buts and so on, Alex. When there's a pandemic of the kind that we've got now, given that nothing like this has happened for over a century, the last one killed my great-grandfather in 1918, there are no experts. There's no rule book to begin with. Nobody has any experience, and nobody can predict exactly what is going to happen. And if you said to everybody, 2 years ago, that we'd be where we are now, absolutely nobody would have given that any kind of credit. That just didn't seem to be possible. And that includes the good and the bad. The bad being, well, we still have 90,000 cases a day in the UK. The good being, we're up to, 89% have had their first dose. Over 80% have had the second dose. These vaccines work. We didn't have those 2 years ago. So, looking forward, what would my prediction be? I think this could be the beginning of the end, because we've got an extremely infectious disease still going through. It's wiping out previous strains. Omicron seems to be extremely effective in getting rid of other forms of coronavirus. But it does seem to be more mild. It's a little hard to tell whether that's because we're all vaxxed to the eyeballs, or at least most of us are, or whether that's because people have been infected and so they've got a natural immunity, or whether people are being very, very cautious. But it does look as if this might be the beginning of the end of this. Sooner or later, it's got to finish. Sooner or later, all this will pass. There has to come a point at which we can say, do you know what? It's feeling better. It's looking better. Next winter's not going to be as bad as this. That's my hope.
Well, one does hope that. But I mean, we've been told, haven't we, that a lot of this policy and locking people down, yes, is to save lives, but most importantly, to protect the NHS. That's the mantra that was repeated over and over again throughout the pandemic. And we were told that the government was following the science. Is there a worry now that the governments have both created a sort of illusionary hero in the form of the science, and at the same time a big red button, that when the NHS is overwhelmed again next Christmas, as it seems to be every year with or without COVID, that they can hit the red button and say science told us to do it?
Well, science, the word just means knowledge. And we're adding to that knowledge all the time. And it's changing all the time, not least because we're getting daily updates, which then have to be kind of analysed and thought about by people far cleverer than you and me put together. And it can be very difficult at the in the maelstrom to see exactly where it's going to go. When you look back, you're quite right. Hindsight's wonderful. It's just never available when you need it to start taking decisions. But the best way of protecting the NHS is to get vaccinated. And the best way for the NHS to protect the NHS, in my humble opinion, is for everybody who works in it to get vaccinated. I find it astonishing that there are still people working in the front line in the NHS who haven't been vaccinated. The government and Parliament have taken the view that that's got to come to an end. But they should have taken that view, in my opinion, a year or so ago. We've already got that view now with care homes. And I think it's important. If you're working with people who are very vulnerable and who are sick, and they may be in hospital for totally other reasons, like a heart attack or a stroke or cancer, then you shouldn't be putting them at risk of catching an infection. And that should mean that if you work in the NHS, your duty is to get vaccinated. And that applies, I think, to yourself and all your family. That would be my feeling.
Edwina, fantastic to have you back on. I'm sure we'll be speaking again very soon. Edwina Currie, who else? Former Conservative MP, and once herself, of course, a junior health minister at a time of a bit of a public health scandal when it came to salmonella in eggs. I don't know how many of you remember that. Back in 1987, was it? Not sure. I was a nipper. Now, a group of MPs say transgender people should no longer have to live in their acquired gender for 2 years before getting legal recognition. The Women and Equalities Committee, led by Tory MP Caroline Noakes, also say that transgender people shouldn't need a doctor's sign-off for gender dysphoria to be recognised. But some women's rights campaigners argue this move could jeopardise single-sex spaces. Well, shall we find out why? I'm joined by Dr. Nicola Williams, who's a spokesperson for Fair Play for Women, and she also gave evidence to the committee. Nicola, should it be down to doctors or self-declaration to legally establish someone's gender? I mean, what's wrong with someone saying, I'm a woman, I believe I'm a woman, or alternatively, I believe I'm a man, without having a doctor diagnosing it, without having to live 2 years as someone of, the opposite sex to the one they were born with?
Okay, let me set out then exactly what the proposals are, because I think then viewers can make their minds up whether this is outdated or whether the MPs are being sensible here. So the Gender Recognition Act is the law that allows people to change the sex that's written on their birth certificate and to hide the fact that it was changed. Now, birth certificates are important legal documents, and I don't think it's unreasonable that there should be some checks and balances there. One of those checks is that someone has at least lived as trans for a period of time and has a doctor's diagnosis of gender dysphoria. No need to have surgery, no need to have any medication, but simply a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. So what MPs want is to wipe away that process and to have an on-demand system. So that would mean any man, for any reason, would be able to change his birth certificate to say that he had been born female and that it would be a criminal offence for anyone to reveal that that man hadn't been born male at all. So, is that something that trans people should have the right to do? No one else has the right to change their birth certificate. And we need to know people's birth sex in society. It matters, and it matters a lot to women and girls, because we have laws to protect women and girls, to give us single-sex spaces, and this is based on people's birth sex. So it's a space for people who were born female, and we can say no to anyone who was born male. Now, that system simply doesn't work if there's another law that comes in that allows male people to hide the fact that they're male. So there's an obvious clash, and that's why we oppose it, because these two laws just don't work together. And so we have to make sure that there's something that works for everyone. And having the diagnosis of gender dysphoria is one simple check that we're asking trans people to have. And that's why we oppose these ideas from these MPs.
But why is there such a push and such a clamour all of a sudden for gender self-ID? And then whenever anybody like you speaks up about this and gives evidence and says, well, it's quite obvious, we can't have a scenario where any old Tom, Dick or Harry can suggest that they're Deborah, Marjorie or Valerie, that all of a sudden you're called a transphobe. Why is there all of a sudden this urgency to push through something as sensitive as gender self-ID?
I think we have to distinguish here between trans rights and trans demands. Now, I support trans rights. Trans rights are things like the right for a trans person not to be discriminated against at work, or it's the right for a trans person to be safe when they walk down the street. So that's why we have hate crime laws to protect trans people. And it's the right for trans people to have access to good healthcare, for example. These are trans rights, and trans people should not have to go through checks and balances to get those rights. All of those rights are already based on self-ID. So any person who thinks they're trans can say they're trans and have all those rights. I think that's good. But what we're talking about here with birth certificates is that it's for a trans person to be able to say, not that they're trans, that they were literally born the opposite sex. So for someone who was born male to say they are literally female, that they were born female the same as you and I. Now that is a step too far. That is a demand too far because it impacts other people. And that's why we have to say, no, actually, this is too much. We need the system that works for everyone. You can't simply change a birth certificate without some controls. And calling us transphobic for objecting to that is ridiculous. We are simply saying, no, women are affected. We have a view on this and we need to be heard too.
Too true, Nicola. We love having you on, raising this important issue. Keep up the good fight. Nicola Williams there, who's spokesperson for Fair Play for Women. It strikes me, you know, that in the same way that not all of us are burglars, if you leave your front door open, you can bet your bottom dollar that it'll be a burglar who walks through it and takes the opportunity. So surely, if we create a policy where any man can just say, I'm a woman, and go into women's toilets or changing rooms, it's not going to be the good and normal guys doing that, is it? Have a think. Still to come on the afternoon agenda. Is it the most wonderful time of the year? Or is it frankly just the most stressful? 1 in 5 parents say they are too stressed over Christmas to enjoy the celebrations. Yep, I bet you're nodding along in agreement. I couldn't agree more. Hate the whole thing. Hate it. I'll be here, of course, keeping you company. And I'll be back again in just a moment. You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Now, 1 in 5 parents say they are too stressed over Christmas to enjoy it. That's according to a new poll, which found a quarter of adults have overly idealistic expectations for the festive season. Behavioural psychologist Joe Hemmings joins us now from London. Joe, what is the most stressful aspect of Christmas? Is it the dinner, the shopping, the family dynamics, the hitting the sauce at 9 a.m? Why is it for a lot of us this time of year that we look forward to, and usually it can end up a bit of a nightmare?
It's all of those things. And actually what amazes me that only 1 in 5 parents say they're really stressed by it. I'd expect it to be 4 out of 5 parents that are kind of doing well. So I think where it comes from is we have very early Christmas adverts on TV with the beautifully bronzed turkey, the glistening vegetables, the perfect roasties, children all very well behaved, everything that's on that table looking magnificent, and every ad adds to our expectations, our unrealistic expectations. So we've only got one place to go from there, unfortunately. And what happens is, if you set yourself this idealized version of Christmas Day, for example, you cannot enjoy it because it will never meet those expectations. Something always goes wrong on Christmas Day. It's kind of part of, we should know about it by now. And we haven't had a normal Christmas since 2019. So there's an extra pressure now, for those that can make a Christmas this year, in order to make it really special, because last year wasn't so great. And people forget to enjoy themselves. People have got to park some of those things that they fret about. The perfection of it needs to sort of you just need to breathe it away and get on with it as a normal family, enjoying yourself. Who cares about the mess? Who cares if something is burnt or we forgot to put the Yorkshires in or whatever it is? Something will always happen. And I think we have to embrace that that's how Christmas works.
But what is it about human nature that we have this obsession with keeping up with the Joneses? Most families must have had a sequence of horror stories at Christmas time. The family argument, the granny nods off to the Queen's speech, spilling a brandy all over her lap, the kids don't like the presents, something gets broken. Why don't more of us just opt out and say, no, we're not going to go along with this. We're not going to buy the turkey. We're not going to start drinking at 9 a.m. and we're not going to invite all our distant relatives into our sitting room because, frankly, it's too hectic.
I think a lot of us think about it. Around about October, November, you think, no, I'm not going to get sucked into this. And then it starts sort of coming at you from all directions in the media, the press, the TV, whatever it is. Then you sort of get dragged back into it. So Christmas is a bit like giving birth, right? So people, if they gave birth once, probably wouldn't have children again. But, you kind of forget the painful bit. And you think, no, I'll have another child. I mean, we just edit out the bad bits, which is good, and we keep the good bits. We forget, all the disasters. And we put this unrealistic expectation that this year will be different. This year, those disasters won't happen. But I think what we have to do is embrace that they're not disasters. They're just part of trying to create an illusion, if you like, that no one can maintain that. So enjoy it, for goodness sake, for those mums particularly, and it is more mums than dads, have that glass of bubbly to relax you, let it get on, give people chores to do, make sure you're prepped and organised, but most of all, make sure you enjoy and you laugh off some of the supposed disasters, because they're part of what the day is about.
And what would you recommend to other people? Like the families, I can see why, mums and dads have to do the Christmas thing. So it'd be a bit Scrooge-like, wouldn't it, saying to your kids, we're not doing presents and Christmas dinner and crackers and all the rest of it. But what about the rest of us? I mean, surely we can just sit back with a cocktail, watch some television and not really care.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think this year will be different. I think Christmases will be smaller because we've got to take or to be extra cautious. So I think people have already scaled down the size of their Christmas days. And I think that might benefit people a huge amount because there's less people to entertain. People, some don't mind spending it on their own. Some will just have a small group gathering, makes it so much easier. And you just got to it's about self-care. You've got to do what makes it feel good for you. So if you bust into the Baileys at 11 o'clock and that makes you feel good, that's fine. Just don't expect to look like a TV ad, because that's just doesn't happen in real life.
Wise advice there, Jo Hemmings, behavioural psychologist. And you know what, viewers? I'm going to be spending my Christmas day right here, behind this desk, because I care about you. So if your family's in the middle of having a row, if you don't find any good films on TV you haven't seen 15,000 times already, then hey, you can keep me company. Well, today we've been needing desperately to talk about the science. I've been asking whether you trust sage modelling when it comes to coronavirus forecasting. Now that we've heard what our guests have had to say, it is of course time for you, the erudite viewer, to have the final word. Mo says, don't trust the journalists, and commentators who interpret them wrongly. I trust the scientists and medical people much more. Matt says, mathematical modelling is only able to give a very light indication in most circumstances. Tony says, that's all it is. Forecasting would be far better investing in a crystal ball. They've got no clue. Sure, that's a bit harsh, Matt. I'm sure some of them can add up. Gary says, they can't tell us how severe the variants will be, but they seem to know for a fact that booster jabs work. Am I being stupid or what? Maybe we all are. Martin says, it's Christmas on Saturday. Woohoo! Isn't the whole country supposed to have been infected by then? They always get it wrong. Now, we also put a poll up asking the very same question, and the final result is overwhelming. 94% of you said you do not trust COVID case forecasting, and just 6% of you said yes, you do trust the science. Well, that's all I have time for today. You've been watching The Afternoon Agenda with me, Alex Phillips. I'm back again tomorrow from 4 p.m. till 6 p.m. I hope you'll join me again then. But coming up next, of course, it's the delightful Michelle Dewberry with Jubes & Co. to keep you company for the next hour. So don't go anywhere. Have a glorious evening. And for me, it's goodbye.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Some brighter skies for some tomorrow before more cloud and rain arrives from the west. However, backtrack to this evening and high pressure still firmly in charge as it has been for the last week or so. And what that means, calm conditions and a cold night. But it is waning towards the near continent, allowing milder air to come from the west and also bands of rain. And we'll see that as we head through into Christmas Day. For the time being, though, it's cold outside. Holes in the cloud will allow temperatures to plummet. A fairly widespread frost anywhere from Scotland, England and some parts of Wales. Away from Northern Ireland and the West Country, a keen breeze here, more cloud and temperatures holding up. But certainly it's going to be a frosty start to the day come Wednesday morning across many areas, but with some hazy sunshine, so some brighter skies. Through the morning, though, that cloud will eventually bring some rain to Northern Ireland, quite a fresh wind across Irish Sea coast, as the rain slowly pushes up towards the western parts of Scotland, clipping West Wales as well as the West Country. Drier skies to end the day further east, but temperatures will struggle here, 4, 5, 6 degrees Celsius. And through the evening, as the rain pushes across Scotland, it will turn to snow above around 300-400 metres and even some sleetiness at lower levels for a time. As some showers move in across England and Wales, and then more wet weather returns to Northern Ireland through the latter part of Wednesday night and into Thursday morning. However, the key feature of the weather as we head through Thursday, yes, there'll be quite windy in places, outbreaks of rain, but the temperatures will be a few degrees higher, certainly feeling milder across England and Wales and Northern Ireland. Still a lot of rain, though, just grinding to a halt across Scotland and a keen breeze across the far north as more rain pushes in across Wales and the West Country later, and also that brisk wind. Temperatures here, double figures though, so not so bad, although the air will slowly get colder from the north as we head into Christmas, with a chance of some snow showers in the northeast.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.